So first of all, before I start, I just want to say thank you to all of the advocates who came here to Washington, and thank you all for all your hard work, as Frank mentioned, on 21st Century Cures. We really could not have gotten that thing over the finish line without all of the work that you guys did, and we really appreciate you coming here to Washington. This is probably the first and last time you'll ever hear me say this, but I'm very thankful that it's a typical February 2nd temperature day today, so that you guys aren't sweating through those scarves. I'm sure yesterday was probably a little bit uncomfortable, but yeah, the good thing today is a little bit more like it normally is. So I'm here to talk about the Prescription Drug User Fee Act. You'll hear a lot of overlap with what Frank talked about. There's a lot of interplay between what we saw included in the 21st Century Cures Act and what we're going to be seeing going through this Congress as it relates to PDUFA. So real briefly, I'll tell you who we are at the National Health Council. We were founded in 1920 as a trade association for patient advocacy organizations. We range from rare disease organizations all the way up to groups like heart, cancer, diabetes. What's unique about us is that in the 60s, the CEOs of our patient organizations decided that rather than just talk within silos, we wanted to bring all the stakeholders into membership. So in addition to all the patient organizations that you can see on this slide, we also have insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies, provider organizations, really every segment of the healthcare sector. And what's so unique about this is that allows us to really discuss very complex issues throughout the health ecosystem, so that when we do come up with positions on things, it's been well vetted throughout the community. We have a lot of perspectives from throughout the community, but everything that we do is driven by our mission, which is to provide a united voice for people with chronic diseases and disabilities and their family caregivers. We do issues that are all systemic in nature, so things that are all meaningful to all people with chronic conditions. One of those things is PDUFA. So the Prescription Drug User Fee Act is really a powerful testament to the power of patients. This program started back in the late 80s, early 90s, when HIV patients were really frustrated and fed up with how slow it was getting some of the products that were being researched for HIV through the FDA. So rather than just and they did do a lot of this, where they would chain themselves to the fence at FDA, protest outside the White House, they also got really, really smart and figured out what are a lot of the gaps that existed, some of the barriers to getting these products through the review process. And they really realized that a big part of it was that FDA simply did not have adequate funding to be able to do it. So what they came up with is what's called the Prescription Drug User Fee Act. This is something that is an agreement between the pharmaceutical industry and FDA. And what the two get out of that is pharmaceutical industry helps fund much of the FDA's drug review programs. And what the pharmaceutical industry gets out of it is products get through the market or get through the process faster because there are more resources to actually do the reviews. So a brief history of PDUFA, and I know a lot of people can't see it at the other end, so I'll go through this one a little bit. The first one was really focused on clearing out the decks, getting through the backlog, getting the products that were stuck in the pipeline through. It was a program that was authorized for 5 years, and so every 5 years we come back and have to reauthorize it, and there's a new agreement between industry and the FDA. The second one was also really focused on getting products through the review process faster. And that still is a huge testament and a huge component of what all of the recent PDUFAs have done as well. But as we moved through the process, we realized that FDA was getting more efficient. What are some of the other things that can really create efficiencies, and what are some other things that we can add on? When we got into PDUFA 4, one thing that we saw was that while the patient community was really the driving force behind the birth of PDUFA, we kind of stepped back and said, okay, well, we've done a really good job here, and didn't really participate as much in the process. And what we saw was a huge shift in the focus of that PDUFA, and there was a lot of focus on safety measures, which are very important, but I think some of the unintended consequences where the pendulum swung really far in one direction. There was a lot more emphasis on safety, a lot less on efficacy, and a lot less on the trade-off between benefits and risks. I will say the one thing that was one of the most meaningful things that come out of any of these PDUFAs was a requirement that FDA, during the next PDUFA process, meet with healthcare stakeholders, including patients, to hear from them on a regular, systematic basis to hear what they want to see included in the next PDUFA. So what did we get out of that? PDUFA 5, which was passed in 2012, had a lot of great programs included in it, and we were really happy to see how the program has moved forward. One thing that was probably the most meaningful, and you already heard a little bit about this, is the patient-focused drug development program. This came out of PDUFA. This was really the first time that FDA was looking to have systematic ways of bringing the patient perspective into drug review. It was a series of call for 20 meetings. They've done a few more than that with very specific disease populations. But what we've always said about this, obviously, as everyone in this room knows, there are far more than 20 conditions out there. And while they did learn quite a bit about all of these specific conditions, what the most meaningful thing about this program has been is that they learned how to talk to patients, how to really bring the patient perspective into their processes. One of the other things that was included in there is is called the benefit risk framework, and this is a way for FDA to communicate what inputs went into their decision making, what they saw the benefits of the product were, what they saw the risks of the products were, and it was the first time that they really were able to communicate this more clearly, so that when they made a decision, people had a better understanding of why they decided one way or the other. There was also provisions in there related to qualification of biomarkers and surrogate endpoints. One thing, obviously, that's very important to this community, there was also an increase of funding for the rare disease program. So that's something that, and as I get into what we're going to see in PDUFA 6, has been and will be even more meaningful once PDUFA gets through Congress. So PDUFA 6. So this was an agreement that was agreed to last summer. So it is something that has a lot of provisions that are really taking what we did in PDUFA 5 and really making them more a part of the process. The best example of this is in patient engagement. So with the patient-focused drug development program, they learn how to talk to patients, they learn how to incorporate that into review. What we also really wanted to see is that, yes, it's very important that FDA is talking to patients, but we want those conversations to start way earlier in the research and development pipeline. We have really been calling on the industry to step up their game as well, to learn from patients. What are the outcomes that matter to them? What are the side effects that they don't want to see? How do they really make sure they're shooting at the right target so that they don't spend a lot of resources on a product that once it gets to the market really doesn't meet the needs of what that patient population wants? But in order for industry to do that, they really need some clear, direct guidance from FDA on what type of information it is that they'll accept, what is it that they want them to be asking patients. And so that's what we're going to see with this PDUFA 6. It calls for a series of 4 guidances that are all related to different issues related to patient engagement. This is something that we at the National Health Council and many of our members and other organizations are really working on to try to get some of that patient perspective into what the FDA is going to put out. So we've been convening a lot of stakeholders to have these conversations, and we actually just submitted our first version of this, of some recommendations for what they can include in their guidance. So we think this is going to be probably the most meaningful thing that we see out of the current agreement. Another one that we think is really important is real-world evidence. As many people in this room know, I think it's particularly related to rare diseases, is recruiting for clinical trials can often be very difficult for companies. So how can we find ways of bringing new information into the process as well? We certainly don't want to do away with their current, with the current standards, looking at placebo-controlled trials, but in areas where additional information can be used, we should be looking to use it. This is something that was also included in 21st Century Cures. There's a lot of overlap between PDUFA and Cures. This is one of those areas. But what FDA is proposing is to really Similar to what we do with patient engagement, learn what the science of real-world evidence is, what are the types of data that we can use, not go full-throated and start using it, but learn how can we build this science out, and we'll look into the next PDUFA to figure out how to make that more systemic as we've done with patient engagement. There's also provisions around drug development tools, including biomarkers, creating more transparency around them so companies know where they are in the process, what are the endpoints that have been validated. Mentioned the rare disease program in PDUFA 5 and PDUFA 6. What's really cool is not only have they increased the funding that's gone to it, but now they're looking to incorporate the staff who are part of the rare disease program into the various entities within FDA that are evaluating products. So this is something that, as you all know, there's very intricate nuances of reviewing a rare disease product. So let's get the experts who know about these issues, get them in the room with the people who are reviewing the products, and I think that we'll have a lot of good results from that. There are also provisions around FDA being able to hire and retain the staff that they need. That's something that was also included in 21st Century Cures. It's incredibly important because all of this good work that we are looking for FDA to do, they can't do without the manpower. So we want to make sure that there is ways for them to hire the scientific expertise. Oops, yep, that was that one. So where are we now? So as I mentioned, the agreement was agreed to last summer. It has been submitted to Congress. Now Congress has to sign it into law. The current user fee authorization ends at the end of the fiscal year, which is the end of September. So we need to make sure this happens by then. PDUFA 5 went through with months to spare. It was a very nonpartisan, bipartisan process, and we really want to make sure that happens again this time. We want FDA to have plenty of time to really start preparing how to hire the staff that they need to fill the obligations they'll have as part of this agreement. One thing that I haven't discussed, I know we want to focus on PDUFA, there are other user fees that are out there as well. The medical devices, they're going through what will be PDUFA 4, so they have the same program in the device center. Two newer ones are around generics and biosimilars. So those will likely be considered as some sort of a package. I know that on the House side, they had a hearing today, it might still be going on, about generics and biosimilars. So they're starting the process over in the House. They should be starting to do it here soon. It's really important that we continue to let people in Congress know that it is an incredibly important and incredibly powerful tool that the FDA has to get these things through, because not only does it help fund their core mission to review products, but there's a lot of great things that are included in this that we think are going to build on top of the last PDUFA, that will build on top of 21st Century Cures, that should really help meet the goal that all of us in this room share, and that's to get high quality products to people faster. So with that, I thank you, and I will turn it back over.